Welcome back. All right, so yesterday was my second take of a 1999 entry draft, redraft, and so today I'm doing 2000. This is absolutely the first time I've done one on 2000. So yesterday we had 12 players in the first round who did not make it past 100 NHL games. In this draft, which is 30 players deep because Columbus and Minnesota have been added, there are 10 players who did not play 100 games. There are another 3 who didn't play 200 in the NHL. This is where noteworthy, too, is that Boston missed twice. They draft Lars Johansson and they draft Martin Samuelsson. Johansson and Samuelsson, names of players who have played plenty in the NHL, but not these two particular players with those surnames. So, 1 through 30, we all understand the drill. Okay, cool. All right, number 1 on the list, and this is where I remind people this does not change history. It doesn't mean that this player has been drafted there. But what's interesting is Henrik Lundqvist comes in at number 1. Henrik Lundqvist is a New York Rangers legend. But just imagine if Mike Milbury had gone up to the podium and said, we're going to go way off script here. We're going to go with Henrik Lundqvist, a goaltender who I think was drafted, 12th round, 10th round, really late draft pick Henrik Lundqvist, and people would have thought he was absolutely bonkers. They would have called for his head, but it would have turned out better than DiPietro, and it would have allowed for people to forgive the Islanders when Luongo went to Florida and became a pretty darn good goaltender. Number 2 on the list. To the Atlanta Thrashers. So in yesterday's draft, I gave them Henrik Zetterberg. This draft, I'm giving them Marian Gaborik. Marian Gaborik, of course, was drafted by the Minnesota Wild. If Marian Gaborik had gone to Atlanta, who knows? If the Atlanta Thrashers had just been run better, maybe they don't lose the building. Maybe we're talking about Atlanta going into, their 25th season and beyond. But they weren't run better. They didn't get 25 years, and now there's still that debate about whether or not they're going to get a team, when they're going to get a team, what that's going to look like, and how angry hockey fans are going to be when it happens. So, yeah, Marian Gaborik, number 2 on the list in this redraft. Number 3, so this might make up for it for Minnesota fans, just a little bit. Justin Williams. Justin Williams never put up fantastic totals in the regular season, but what he did was he showed up in the playoffs. One of the best playoff performers in National Hockey League history, I think. One of the best players at raising his game come playoff time. Justin Williams, I felt like number 3 was the right spot. Part of me was thinking second could work, but I'll go with third and Gaborik second on the board. 4th on the list. Going to Columbus instead of Atlanta. Danny Heatley. Danny Heatley, of course, before he became a meme with the whole 1507. Before that time, Danny Heatley was a pretty darn good player in his own right. And he had a good career, just he wasn't at that top level for long enough for me to put him ahead of Williams. I understand there are people that are going to say, I can't believe you have Williams ahead of Heatley. I can't believe Williams' playoff numbers are so darn good that I have to defend that. But either way, Heatley at number 4 goes to Columbus as their first draft pick, which would have changed things tremendously. Number 5, going to the Islanders. So they've already drafted Lundqvist. In this case, Antoine Vermette goes to the New York Islanders 5th. Vermette, solid number 2 center during a large portion of his career. Could play on the third line as well. And ended up, I think he won a 2015 Cup with the Chicago Blackhawks, as I remember. Played for some time in Arizona too. So if the Islanders had drafted Lundqvist and Vermette, Milbury would have been told after the draft, you're crazy, I don't know why you drafted those players, but he would have looked really smart in hindsight. Number 6 on the list. Oh, good. This is to Nashville. So I never plan this out where I have the logos next to the numbers when I'm figuring out who I would have taken where. Scott Hartnell. So one thing I do different with the redrafts now than when I started out, I used to just start out with a bunch of names on a sheet of paper, and then I would stand here and live on camera, I would tell you who's going where. And I felt like there was too much of the pauses, too much of me second guessing. And so I go through the draft and I decide who's going where before the camera starts rolling. Scott Hartnell I had 6th. Scott Hartnell to Nashville. That works. Hartnell down became a thing. Was one of my favorite things in hockey at the time. And I still think it's fun. Counting how many times Scott Hartnell falls down on the ice. But hey, the effort was there. You don't fall down without effort. I guess you could. I guess if the effort wasn't involving skating. So number 7, going to Boston. So Boston drafted Lars Jonsson, a defenseman. Instead of that, Nicholas Kronwall. Nicholas Kronwall to Boston. That would have been nice. That honestly, that would have been a good addition for the Boston Bruins. And yeah, just imagining Kronwall out there Kronwalling guys, and if you'd had him and Chara together for any period of time, that would have been quite the physical team that the Boston Bruins could have had. Of course, he gets drafted by Detroit instead. But yeah, Kronwall goes number 7 in my redraft. And there's going to be people saying he should go ahead of Hartnell. There are going to be people saying he should go ahead of Vermette. I had these arguments with myself before we started recording this. Number 8, to Tampa, a long-term defenseman in the National Hockey League, Ron Hainsey. Ron Hainsey, reliable defenseman, played a ton of games in the National Hockey League. One of those in this draft class who played the most games. And this is where I point out that even in a draft that's considered bad, and both 99 and 2000 are considered to be bad, right? In comparison with other drafts, you still get good players. You still get very good players. So when we were talking about the 2025 draft, no, this is a bad draft. These are the drafts I think back to with, yeah, in the end, some of those top prospects are bad. But that also came down to scouting not being nearly as effective as it is now. We don't see anywhere near the amount of busts now that we used to see 25 years ago. So, Hainsey goes number 8 to Tampa in this redraft. Number 9, to Calgary, instead of Brent Cron, a goaltender who just never ended up becoming a starting goaltender, didn't play 100 games. Lubomir Visnovsky. Visnovsky played, I think, roughly 700-800 games in the National Hockey League. Good defenseman. So we've got a run of defensemen here. We got 3 defensemen in a row. After forwards, we had 5 forwards after a goaltender. So goaltender, 5 forwards, 3 defensemen. It's like I'm drafting a team this way. But yeah, Lubomir Visnovsky at his peak was a good top 4 defenseman and a solid pick at number 9. Number 10, another defenseman. So the Chicago Blackhawks decided to go with a couple of Russians. They went with Mikhail Yakubov and Pavel Vorobyev, and neither of them played 100 games in the National Hockey League. This is why when people talk about how things got rigged up for Chicago, at this point it sure wasn't. This was a team that wasn't playing great hockey, and their scouting clearly not where it could have been. In the redraft at number 10, I have Paul Martin going there. So Paul Martin goes number 10, another defenseman. So that's 4 defensemen in a row. That's weird. I did not plan it out that way. In fact, if I'd seen it that way on paper, I would have been like, doesn't a forward need to go here? So number 11 on the board. Is it another defenseman? Yes, actually it is. So Chicago, instead of drafting Pavel Vorobyev, it's another defenseman who I believe was drafted by the Minnesota Wild, Nick Schultz. Nick Schultz, top 4 defenseman at his peak, could play bottom. He was in the bottom 2 at certain points in his career as well. But Nick Schultz, good, serviceable defenseman. So I have Chicago coming out of this draft in the first round with Paul Martin and Nick Schultz. Would not have been sexy picks. There would have been questions asked as well. However, it would have ended up being the wise decision in that neither Yakubov or Vorobyev ended up making it the NHL level. I knew what Chicago was trying to do. It just didn't work. And then the run on Russians continued with Anaheim, who drafted Alexei Smirnov, who didn't make it. And, I mean, just for, right, Smirnov ice, like, it's right there. Just the tie-in's right there, but Yeah, he didn't play enough games to get a commercial deal out of it. So number 12 on my redraft, I have another defenseman. Wow. This is a good defenseman or a good draft for defenseman. Brooks Orpik. Brooks Orpik, mainly a depth defenseman towards the end of his career. Physical defenseman. You can argue him ahead of other defensemen, had him on the board if you want to. For me, for this redraft, I'm putting Orpik at 12. But yeah, Orpik, good defenseman, played a ton of games in the NHL, and always gave a solid effort when he was in the lineup. Number 13 on the list, goaltender. Ilya Bryzgalov. Bryzgalov, of course, famous for Why You Have to Be Mad. And he got a very, very wealthy contract from Philadelphia. He had ups and downs. He was a backup. He was kind of a forgotten backup in Anaheim at points. Ends up going to Arizona, has a good run there, signs for a big contract, goes to Philadelphia, and doesn't work. So for me, Bryzgalov, in the end, I feel like with the ups and downs being as they are, I'm fine with him being 13th on the list. If you want to put him as high as, say, 6th or 5th, go for it. But for me, Bryzgalov, I have it 13th. But if you wanted a soundbite during his playing career, it didn't matter where he was playing or how he was playing, you got a very good soundbite when you interviewed Ilya. Number 14. Now, originally, Vaclav Nedorost is drafted here by Colorado. He played 99 games in the NHL. Almost didn't get put on that board. But number 14... Brad Boyes. Brad Boyes, good forward. He had some down years in there as well, as a lot of players on this list did. But Brad Boyes was a good forward, had some good offensive instincts, certainly scored his share of points during his peak years, but I put him 14th in the redraft. Number 15. Okay, who do I have at 15? I've been crossing out numbers and moving guys around. There it is. So Artem Kryukov is drafted 15th overall by Buffalo here. That is not the player who's going to get drafted. It's going to be Jarrett Stahl. Jarrett Stahl, good forward. Yep. But now we're getting into a bit of a run of forwards here, maybe. Jarrett Stahl had some good years. And overall, I felt like 15th was the right spot for him. Didn't play as long as some of the other guys ahead of him on the board here. So it is really a matter of you decide, so does the star power matter more? Does the number of games matter more? It makes redrafts kind of tricky for me. And that's why I've got so many numbers crossed out and cross-hatched and over-hatched and underscored and you name it. So number 16 for Montreal, who did not draft a player at 16 that played less than 100 games. I think they took Marcel Hossa here. So at 16, and he did play over 100 games. So I talk often when looking back at these at players that I liked playing EA Sports NHL games with. John Michael Lyles was my favorite. For like 3 or 4 years running there, whenever I would start up my dynasty team, I would go looking for John Michael Lyles. So I would do like the league-wide draft where you just hold it at a draft. Everybody goes to new teams. And I would go looking for Lyles. And I would trade whatever to get him. He was the best defenseman in the game for me personally. And so based on that, I kind of had an affinity for him. But then he was a pretty good defenseman too. So John Michael Lyles, for me at 16, I think is the right pick. Montreal would have been an interesting spot for him at that time as well. Number 17, in that I don't think he ever played there. Number 17, so originally Alexei Mikhnov gets drafted by the Edmonton Oilers. Doesn't play 100 games. Going to the Oilers, Steve Ott. And Steve Ott is one that I went kind of back and forth on where I think he would have got drafted. Steve Ott was kind of the ultimate shift disturber on the ice. The offense was there at times as well. He definitely got his share of penalty minutes. And so I feel like Ott at 17 is the right call. He did play for Dallas as well. He was one of those players that I will say every now and then I would kind of say to the TV, okay, you've already got a penalty. Please just go to the box. But yeah, so Steve Ott is one of those guys who I could see people thinking he's top 10. I could see people saying he doesn't belong at 17. He was a very divisive figure. Thankfully, we don't have those in the NHL anymore. Number 18. Dropping from 4. Rostislav Klesla, or as he was known when he played in the NHL, Rusty. Rusty Klesla. Klesla, fun name to say. I did like him as well, but for me, 18th is the right spot for him. Never quite lived up to the expectation of being the first ever draft pick by the Columbus Blue Jackets, but he had a good career. Not necessarily a fantastic one, but a good career, and so Klesla comes in at 18. At 19... So this one was tough too because his NHL career didn't last as long as it could have. He ends up going over to the KHL. And Alexander Frolov, if he had stayed in the NHL, might have ended up higher on the list than where he is at 19. He had a couple of very, very good offensive seasons. And then he had a down year in the NHL, and he ends up over in the KHL. And so Alexander Frolov is lower on this list than I think he would have been if he'd stuck it out in the NHL. Good offensively minded forward, Alexander Frolov. So let's see, we've gone forward, defense, forward. So that's good. It's nice to have that change and that kind of thing going on. At 20, I've seen the number 20 how many times on this sheet of paper here? I don't want to have to pause. I don't have to pause. I just found it. So going to LA. And what's interesting is Dominic Moore played for a lot of teams during his NHL career. I don't think he played for LA. Played for a lot of teams, though. When I was doing journeyman videos and I was looking at players who played for a lot of teams, Dominic Moore had to be in there. And one thing about Dominic Moore is that I know he works in TV at this point. I think as a broadcaster, it helps if you've been with a lot of teams. I would think that'd be a benefit. If you've played for almost a third of the National Hockey League, or at least a quarter of the National Hockey League, you would have opinions on about a quarter of the teams in the NHL from firsthand experience. It's why I think Mike Sillinger should be on everything if if he had the want to do that, because he played on 12 different NHL teams. I'm sure he'd have a lot of stories from a lot of locker rooms, and he'd probably have information on a lot of star players as well. But Dominic Moore, number 20 on the list. Number 21. Okay, another defenseman. So Dominic Moore is a forward. All right, I didn't think I was going to mess this up. I just wanted to make sure. Anton Volchenkov. Volchenkov, who was a defenseman for the Ottawa Senators. So that works out pretty well, doesn't it, at 21? Volchenkov apparently was meant to be a Senator. Good defenseman. Didn't play at a ton of games in the NHL, comparatively speaking to some of the others on the board. But good defensive defenseman, sure. Volchenkov at 21. At 22. Yep, 2 T's. I always want to double check. Unless I wrote it down wrong, which happens. But if that happens, it's the entertainment guy's fault. Matthew Lombardi. Matthew Lombardi, good career for him. I always thought there was more there. Matthew Lombardi was one of those forwards that I kept waiting for him to hit a level that he didn't quite get to in the NHL, which was frustrating to watch, to be honest. I can't imagine for Flames fans how frustrating that had to be. Because he had the hands and he had the speed. It was just, there wasn't quite enough there often enough. Otherwise, yeah, he could have been top 10 on this list. But number 22, I do think, comparatively speaking to the 1999 draft, I think 2000 was deeper. Did have its share of misses in the first round, but I think overall it was a deeper draft. 23, so originally Nathan Smith was drafted here by Vancouver. Interesting part being Nate Smith, a member of the Abbotsford Canucks this past season. Pretty sure they're not related. Number 23. You know what's interesting is I remember rumors that Paul Gaustad was on the Canucks radar in terms of trade targets. I seem to remember them looking for somebody who's very good on faceoffs, and Paul Gaustad being one of the names that the Canucks were looking at. So Paul Gaustad, good faceoff guy, center, a big player as well, as I remember it. And yeah, he would have been a better pick for the Canucks than Nathan Smith. I don't think it's controversial for me to say that Gaustad would have been a better fit than Nathan Smith for the Vancouver Canucks. But that's me. Number 24. Depth forward mostly, but he would have been very popular, I think, in Toronto. Did he play in Toronto? I don't think he did. Travis Moen was part of the fourth line for the Anaheim Ducks when they won the Cup in 2007. And that fourth line for the Ducks was good. I think there were some underrated aspects of that team. And Moen went out and did his job every game. And that's what makes me like players like that. They go out, they do their job every game, and they do it well. Moen was one of those guys. So I think if Toronto drafted him at 24, that's not a bad idea. 25. So for Dallas, it's a defenseman. So we've had a run on forwards. We've had 3 forwards in a row. Because of the way that Derek is spelled, there are going to be people ahead of me on this. Derek England, who ended up finishing out his career in Vegas. But in this redraft, I have him getting drafted by Dallas, 25th overall. And he had a long career. He was a defensive-minded defenseman. And not too shabby of a pick for 25th. Just take a look at this. I still think Patrick Stefan probably gets into this draft. But keep in mind that that was 28. And I don't know if he would have come in ahead of 28. I don't know if he would have. Anyways, number 26 on the list. So for the Washington Capitals, I'm going to say this for Rick DiPietro. So he's the number 1 draft pick originally, of course, by the Islanders. They trade out Luongo, they draft DiPietro, and it doesn't work out for him. Rick DiPietro was a good goaltender. And then injuries hit. And then injuries hit again. Then he comes back from an injury. He decides to pick a fight. He loses the fight. He gets injured in the fight. And the cycle just continues of injury after injury for Rick DiPietro. If not for the injuries, DiPietro probably would have had a pretty good career. I don't know that he ever would have lived up to that contract from the New York Islanders, but I do think he would have had a good career, and he would have been higher than 26th on the redraft. He was a good goaltender, but when you're chosen over Roberto Luongo, that's a problem. It's not your fault, obviously. And when you're kind of seen as like this linchpin of a rebuild and you're the guy, you're putting pressure on a goaltender that I just don't think DiPietro was going to be able to live up to. That hype just wasn't for him. 27. So I've previously mentioned Boston missed twice. This is where they drafted Martin Samuelsson. In the redraft, it's another guy who we see on TV, Mike Rupp. So Mike Rupp goes 27th overall to Boston. Didn't he play in Boston? I think he played in Boston at one point. So yeah, Mike Rupp is a good announcer at this point. And he's got some good stories from his time playing hockey. And I know for Devils fans, they might not think that Rupp being drafted by Boston works. But for me as a Boston fan, sure. 28th. So Philadelphia is drafting a defenseman here. Nicholas Wallin. Wallin had some stops and starts here and there. The potential was definitely there. You could see the talent too. It never quite clicked. Not often enough, so he ends up 28th on the board for me. And it is something that we see in the NHL through the whole time I've watched it, where there are those players that you see glimpses, it just never quite comes through often enough. And for a GM, he's a good option, but there might be a better option, that kind of thing, right? Number 29 to Detroit. Tomas Kopecky. It is Kopecky, right? Or Kopecky? Nah, Kopecky. I'm going with that. It's number 29 on the list. Detroit's drafting at this point. We're almost 24 and a half minutes into the video. So at any rate, I don't know how many people are still here watching this. But yeah, Tomas Kopecky didn't play that long in the NHL. Mainly a bottom 6 forward. But he is a forward, so we've gone goaltender, forward, defenseman, forward. And then we round things out with number 30. And I debated about which player to put into the number 30 spot. I did decide not to put Raffi Torres on the list. So if you're asking where's Raffi Torres, I'm not going to give a sarcastic response. Raffi Torres to me is overshadowed by the massive suspensions he got. Like, not just a couple. It's not just a couple of suspensions. It's some massive suspensions for Raffi Torres. And while he was a talented forward, sure, I was like, I'm not putting him in the top 30 because that to me overshadows everything else. So I went with, to St. Louis, Matt Hendricks. And I remember arguing with people on the internet about Raffi Torres ages ago. I remember when he left Vancouver that there were Canuck fans who were like, I wish we could get him back. And my answer was, nah. And I remember those arguments on the Canucks forums about it. So Matt Hendricks is the number 30 pick for me, a player who got his share of penalty minutes. He could play on the fourth line, moved around the league a little bit during his career. But I felt like Hendricks at 30 was the guy. I couldn't put Torres on the list. I was like, nah, I can't. And I apologize for people who aren't going to be happy that I couldn't put Torres on the list, but I couldn't do it. I felt like, nope, this is my 30 right here. If I was doing the redraft today, that's where I would go with it. Where would Torres go? If it wasn't for the suspensions, which are aplenty, and, half a season's worth, and just that's one suspension that was half a season's worth, I might put him maybe ahead of Ott, maybe ahead of Frolov. So probably in that region. But the suspensions just for me took him out. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.